I want to welcome all our previous listeners back to our first webinar of the new year and welcome those who may be joining us for the first time. I hope everyone had a safe and prosperous holiday season. We have some great presenters lined up already for 2023, and I'm looking forward to bringing you some new perspectives on old subjects and introducing some new subjects in the coming year. Tonight, I have the pleasure of introducing Chris Pfaff, lead instructor and owner of PHRT Hazmat and Rescue. While I've never met Chris personally, I've talked to him so many times I feel like we're lifelong friends. And I can honestly say he's very passionate about the work he does and extremely happy that he and our marketing director, Sam Tallarico, had a chance meeting at Fire Rescue International in San Antonio last year. Before we begin, would like to introduce what Provident's all about. Provident Insurance Programs got its start in 1902 in the Pittsburgh area as an independent insurance agency. In 1928, the owner saw a need to start serving volunteer fire departments with a customized accident and health policy. Today, we provide volunteer, combination, and career firefighters and emergency medical responders with a multitude of programs. We also offer special risk and transportation insurance programs. Provident is celebrating its 5th year as one of the top insurance employers as listed by the Insurance Business Magazine. Our emergency services programs, obviously, we have our accident and health insurance. And if you're an accident and health client, you have access to our first responder assistance program for not only you as the member, but members of your family. We also offer a 24-hour accidental death and dismemberment policy. So if you were to be killed by an accident off duty from the fire department, there would be benefit to your family. We have a group term life insurance policy that we offer, a critical illness and cancer policy that provides a living benefit if you are diagnosed with cancer, have renal failure, a heart attack, or stroke. And then we have our Fire Plus property and casualty insurance, where we insure your buildings and equipment. If you're a Fire Plus client, you're entitled to use our online Fire Plus Training Academy, which is available to you through Fire Rescue One at no cost. So tonight, air monitoring, not just for hazmat techs anymore. And without further ado, we're going to let Chris get into his presentation.
Well, good evening, everybody. Give me 1 second. Let me set up and share my screen so I can show you my presentation. But thank you very much, Chief, for that introduction, and thank you for the support from Provident with this. That is an awesome benefit you guys, without a doubt, have. There we go. So there we go. I'm hoping everybody can see my screen right there. Let's see if I can wake this thing up. Nope, that's not working, but that's all right. I got the opportunity and the ability to actually go forward and backwards with this. So once again, my name is Chris Pfaff with hazmatandrescue.com. And tonight we're going to go over air monitors and you. Now, it's pretty important to understand the history, the background, and everything with that. And we're going to get a little bit into the weeds with this, but not unbelievably into the weeds. Before I do get into those little bit of weeds as we go through this, let's just talk about a little bit of the groundskeeping, shall we? Just like Chief said, I had the opportunity to meet Sam and the members from Provident down in San Antonio at Fire Rescue International. And it was an amazing experience, first to work with them, and through our Twitter page, we ended up sharing a lot of training opportunities. That's the only thing that we share at Hazmat and Rescue on our Twitter page, is any type of training opportunity, whether that be online or in person, any conferences that we see. And we noticed that Provident posted up a lot of webinars and a lot of training, such as this one right here. So it was a great opportunity to meet with these people in person. But more importantly for you as a responder, I truly recommend that you go to, whether it be Fire Rescue International or the Baltimore IFC conference or FDIC, I don't care what conference it is, whether it be a state, national, local conference, get out there, go to the vendor booths, go into the instruction classes, get your business card. And if you don't have a business card, get your phone ready, meet some friends, meet some partners, That's what this game is about. That's what fire and rescue is all about, whether it be any of these disciplines, to include the EMS field, of getting that collaboration, that partnership, to make sure that we all understand how we do things in different parts of the country. Now, with that, I want to make sure I advertise heavily, just like a NASCAR driver, for Provident, because I had this opportunity to get this great hat from Provident when I went down and I checked out their booth. So enough about Provident, enough about all that other fun stuff. What about me? Who is this dude sitting here in front of your computer screen that's talking to you about possibly air monitors here in a few minutes? Well, my name is Chris Pfaff, and we are here on behalf of hazmatandrescue.com. We're an online training organization, just like Chief said. Everything that we have is digitally set up, so we have 5 to 15-minute training videos to get you compliant with operations, awareness, technician level, ongoing training. The hands-on opportunity is going to happen with your authority having jurisdiction. But I've learned all of this from my host agency, West Pierce Fire and Rescue, which I'm actually here in our history room. That's the background that you see, is the history of Lakewood Fire Department and West Pierce Fire Department out of Washington State. We're about half an hour south of Seattle. I've been a hazmat technician and a rescue technician, as you see, for more than just a little bit over a decade and a half. And within my opportunities of both of those positions, I've had the opportunity to be the air monitor manager for our entire district, and supported the air monitor program within our county team. So we have 5 different fire departments for an entire county team, like some other agencies across the nation are set up. Within my time of being an air monitor manager, I've gotten a chance to tear apart and work on MSA air monitors, industrial scientific air monitors. We have now switched over to an entire suite of Draeger monitors. I'm in charge of 2 PIDs, that's photo ionization detectors, 32 air monitors that are on our fire engines, ladder truck, our medic units, battalion chiefs. We have PAC 6500 single gas carbon monoxide sensors that go on our EMS gear. So it goes on every EMS call, as well as radiation detection, other things like that. And of course, we have natural gas monitors. There's a lot of extensive things that some people in here may not be worrying about. I've also had the opportunity with the Washington Task Force 1 with FEMA to be the hazmat manager with that program. And within that, we use multi-ray systems, which do area monitoring, much more advanced air monitoring for natural disasters and hurricanes and other events like that. I've ended up deploying down to Georgia in support of Hurricane Irma. I've supported our team when they've deployed out to Hawaii 2 times. And of course, my team prior to me joining, they ended up responding to significant events such as 9/11 and the Oklahoma Federal Murrah building. So there's a lot of events with that. Within that, I've identified that I have the ability to instruct, and we had a local technical college right down the street. So for the last decade plus, I've been instructing hazmat operations, technician, incident command classes, and of course the ongoing classes. But enough about me. The biggest reason we're here is because I'm just trying to figure out what's going on and how to make sure the regulations work for what we need to know on the ground. So don't worry about all that fun resume and everything else like that. It's just me talking to you about this thing in my hand. That's what we want to know and understand what it means to us. But of course, before we get there, we do want to talk about the history when we talk about regulations. NFPA, OSHA, there's a ton of other ones from the EPA, ANSI, the International Fire Code. We have books on top of books on top of books that most of us as first responders, we understand. We have policies and protocols, but my gosh, I just want to do all the work with the boots on the ground. Well, before we get to the boots on the ground, we need to understand where this framework of everything from your academy to your ongoing training and why it may not have had this type of instruction. So in 2019, they updated NFPA 1001. Most of us here probably understand what NFPA 1001 is. It's our standards to be firefighter 1 and firefighter 2 certified. In the 2013 edition, which was the edition prior to 2019, it didn't mention air monitoring at all in any way, shape, or form. So that little doo-hickey right there, just forget about it. We did not even think about it or talk about it. However, for qualifications to be firefighter 1, we see the competencies for, we have to qualify for competencies of operations level responders in section 6.6 mission specific competencies. So Firefighting says that you have to know a little bit about hazmat to be a firefighter, because we are an all hazards response organization in total across the nation. So we have to understand that hazmat hazard. So if we go back and we look at the hazmat NFPA, because it goes from one to another, we don't have anything that says truly for air monitoring, except for this mission specific competency of 6.7.1.2.1. Well, that mission specific competency says that we have to be aware and we have to understand how to operate an air monitor, how to turn it on, how to calibrate it, how to do a bump test, how to do maintenance on it. Once again, if you look back at chapter 5 of the firefighting NFPA 1001, says you don't have to worry about this. So this is all value added content. So prior to 2019, wasn't required, was not required. So really quickly, and don't worry, I'm going to get back to firefighting, but I'm the hazmat geek, so I at least got to talk about that. Really quickly, with NFPA 472 and now NFPA 470, we have our specific disciplines. So some people may have been confused about what core competencies versus mission specific competencies are. Hazmat awareness. Probably everybody in this room are trained to hazmat awareness. It's a simple, easy few hours of training talking about containers, opening up things like, oh yes, the 2020 ERG or whatever edition that you were initially trained on. If you've been trained on it and you haven't looked at it in a while, I recommend going to page 354 and taking a look. The ERG user guide is back there. But once again, that's not air monitoring. Operations core competencies. That's what most of us have to be trained to get to our firefighter one. It doesn't talk about air monitoring. We have our mission specific competencies, which talks about technical decontamination, getting into chemical protective clothing, the Gumby suits, doing air monitoring. There's a lot of specifics. Heck, they even have underwater hazmat on that for mission specific. So that hits air monitoring. Our incident commanders, they have to be trained up to understand what the numbers are if they have an entry team going in. Our technicians absolutely need to understand all the stuff with the air monitors. And then we also have our specialists. And then the hazmat officer and safety officer, they talk a little bit about monitoring, but these are all those different disciplines that NFPA 470 talks about. Now let's get back into what we need to worry about legally wise with air monitoring. If your state does not go by NFPA, it's not against the law. It's okay. I prefer and recommend that you guys adhere to NFPA 1001. However, it is not required by law. It is a recommendation. It's a standard. OSHA, however, is the law. Now, you may be sitting there thinking to yourself, from whatever state or province you're in or organization that you're in, we're not an OSHA state. We don't need to worry about this. Well, 29 CFR 1910.120 is our HAZWOPER, and this is required by law. They get around this with a little legal loophole. Even if you're not an OSHA state, even if it doesn't require a public entity to have to adhere to OSHA, the EPA 40 chapter 311 says that every agency shall adhere to HAZWOPER, 29 CFR 1910.120. So even though you're not an OSHA state, for this chapter specifically, you are an OSHA state. So everybody across the nation has to adhere to this. If you have any more questions about that, you can go back to the conversation that Chief Mann and I had a few months back, and I go more in depth in the legalese. But back into paragraph Q, which is the emergency responder, that's the ER and HAZWOPER. It says first responders at the ops level, we shall have received 8 hours of training in hazmat operations. Now, of course, this is for hazmat calls. It talks about risk assessment, PPE, basic hazmat terminology, basic control like containment and confinement, decontamination, and termination. There's something I'm noticing that's not on that list. That's correct. Air monitors are not on that list. So once again, there's no regulatory authority for this. And this document was drafted in 1986. It was codified in 1989. It did not require air monitoring for our hazmat operations level responders. However, we've got the loopholes. You got to look down this legal path, and it's so frustrating. 1910.120 paragraph C shows us that for a site characterization, monitoring the air with appropriate direct reading equipment, like these pieces of equipment right here, has to be used. We have to do this. So for a hazmat call, it's always been in there without a doubt. So we sit there and take a look at that. It gives us that clue. The unfortunate thing, this is just for hazmat calls. We're in a firefighting conversation right now. We're not in a hazmat conversation, right? I know that my shirt says hazmat, but I'm thinking Provident and I'm thinking firefighting right now. So we still technically could argue that a fire event is a hazmat call, but and that's a tough argument to deal with. So let's look at what they did in 2019. The writers of NFPA 1001 stated specifically right at the beginning of their firefighter 1 requirements that you as a firefighter trained to firefighter 1 have to operate an air monitoring instrument. Given that air monitor, the basic operation of the monitor and recognition, we need to have knowledge of the uses for an air monitor, the basic operation, and the recognition of the emergency actions to be taken. We also need to have the ability to operate an air monitor, recognize the alarms, and then, of course, appropriately react to those alarms to understand what's going on. So for Firefighter 1 in NFPA 1001 2019 edition, it's required. And it's also in the curriculum. Our curriculum hasn't shifted to that. In IFSTA, Firefighting Essentials 7th edition, it's in Search and Rescue on page 440. Not that I'm a page nerd in any way, shape, or form. I'll prove it right now because I don't remember what page it is in Jones and Bartlett, the newest curriculum that they have, but they have it on firefighter health and safety. So we now have it required per NFPA. However, it's not required under OSHA. So once again, if you're an OSHA state or a non-OSHA state, it's not required by law. But to make sure that we're compliant with the NFPA standard, it is required. So let's get into what we're talking about here. We don't need to worry about the history and laws. The basic recognition and operation of our emergency actions of high and low level alarms. This is exactly what the NFPA 1001 tells us what to do. And this is the guideline that we're going to be taking tonight as we go through this. Let me just move my slide here so I can see this. So for post-fire monitoring, when we do post-fire monitoring, we have to identify this. I'm not going to take this thing into an active fire. If I take this air monitor into an active fire, I'm going to smoke out the monitors. But we do post-fire monitoring to identify some of the hazards. And there's arguments on national chat boards all the time about this. I worry about carbon monoxide and hydrogen cyanide. The Firefighter Smoke Coalition has a lot of great information out about the toxic twins and what it means to you. Now, is that all the hazards that are coming from a structure fire? Absolutely not. Dumpster fires are probably even worse. Don't get me started on lithium-ion battery fires. We talk about hydrogen fluoride and some other very, very toxic materials that are water soluble. You're made of water, so we got to watch out for that. But back to post-fire monitoring, we can quantify an environment with this thing. Carbon monoxide calls. Up here in my state, after 2012, they required in all multifamily occupancies carbon monoxide detectors to be present in at least every occupancy. That has shifted our network up here in in Washington State significantly. I know most states are not at that level, but there are a lot of people that are putting them in their houses, or when houses are getting sold and transferred, they're putting them in there. So in the middle of the night, that little thing's going to start going beep, beep, beep. If you don't have this thing in there to verify what those numbers mean, you're going in blind. So we need that for carbon monoxide calls. We have to worry about odor investigation calls. I can use this thing right here, but this air monitor is a qualification tool, not a quantification tool. And when I keep on saying qualification versus quantification, the word qualification, that's giving me a term of yes or no. Hey, does this guy smell bad right now? Oh, yes, he does smell bad. How bad does he smell? Really bad. How far away is the closest convenience store to your house right now? Is it far or is it really far? It doesn't give me a term, right? It's like 2 blocks in Texas versus 2 blocks in downtown New York. Two very different distances as we take a look at, right? So we need to make sure we qualify the environment with a part per million or a percentage rating. Confined space and trench rescue. I know that that's not firefighting, but once again, us as firefighters, we are going to respond to these technical rescue events first before the rescue technicians get there. So we have to have an awareness of what that atmosphere is. We also have to look at structural hazards and other items like that, but we do have to absolutely be aware of the atmospheric hazard. Structural collapse, more technical rescue, absolutely. Natural gas emergencies. If your agency has natural gas pipelines within their jurisdiction, or if they have propane power. My jurisdiction has natural gas, so we run on natural gas calls all the time. The area where I live does not have natural gas. Most of my neighbors have propane. So if we have a propane leak where now I'm smelling mercaptan, smells like rotten eggs, smells like that burnt sulfur. Well, how much propane's in there? Yep. Once again, back to that qualification. This little tool right here can start giving me the quantification that I need of good or bad. Auto extrication, gasoline leaks. And a lot of us are going to sit there and think that, well, vitamin G is not that bad. It's just a little bit more gasoline on the fire just to make it go up a little bit more. Well, there's videos and there's examples of people filling up and trying to, I think the most recent one was last year. There was a high school kid that poured gasoline on a bonfire. They let it sit and they let it sit and they let it sit. And then they lit it on fire and it pretty much catastrophically exploded. What it was a massive deflagration. But once again, very energetic response, injuring people. There's a very old video of a training burn that firefighters actually did where they poured gasoline in a basement and they let it sit. And they let it sit and they let it sit. And then the gasoline vaporized, throw the flare in, the house blew up. They were not quantifying the environment. But of course, on top of that, there were a lot of changes to NFPA 1403 because of issues like that. Auto extrication, absolutely. And then EMS calls. Like I said, with my agency, my organization, we ended up putting these little doo-hickeys onto all of our EMS bags. And since then, we ended up seeing within the last year and a half that we've had these on, I've probably seen from my EMS responders at least 15 calls where they've quantified the environment that, holy crap, there's a CO element. So now this person's not just, they don't just have an altered level of consciousness because they've had too much alcohol or because there's a blood sugar element. It could be because their entire house has been charged with a low level of carbon monoxide for multiple days, and these people are starting to experience symptoms. I don't have the video right now, but one of the most recent CO classes that I ended up going on, I think it was NBC, the national news, they ended up doing an expose on a family that there was a lady that she thought she had MS. For 3 years, she thought she had MS and she would leave the house and she would become asymptomatic and she'd start getting a little bit better. She'd go back into her house. They found out eventually that it was a heater pipe that had a pinhole leak that was pushing in a small amount of carbon monoxide, that she was getting a chronic dose of carbon monoxide poisoning. And she was unable to walk on her own ability because of the carbon monoxide poisoning. It was found out from just a simple detector. And then, of course, for command posts, we don't think about that too much, whether it be structure fires, whether it be technical rescue, hazmat calls, any type of industrial event. Changing winds from a toxic plume may end up overtaking a command post. I've seen it multiple times within my career, and I've seen jurisdictions up here in Washington face the same hazard as well, unfortunately, with devastating effects. So now back down to, what do we do with this thing and how do we do it? We have an on and off button for them. And of course, I have a few different monitors here, of course, and I can go into the technical issues of every single monitor, but I'm not. I'm just going to talk about the general specifics of it. And we learn how to turn your monitor on or off. And of course, I'm going to be kind to you and I'm going to put my finger over the little on off button. And now my Draeger is on and it is warming up. Likewise, I have my MSA here. Let's see if I can get this one to turn on. Yep. This one has a pump attached to it. We have a hose on the back. This one has the sensors right there on the top. A diffusion type monitor versus a pumped type monitor. You should be able to hear the pump right through my microphone right now. No pump from my Draeger. So this is going to go through a warm up and it's going to make sure that we go through everything that we need to. It takes about 30 to 40 seconds for these things to get set up. Think about it this way. You've got a cell phone. You've got a cell phone. When you turn it on, does it instantly work? No, it usually takes a few seconds. Sometimes we're impatient and it feels like it takes forever, but it still takes a little bit of time for these things to turn on and then to start at least doing what they need to do. They're sniffing the environment, like some people may say. So let's sit there and take a look at the operation of our sensors. We're going to talk about our electrochemical sensors, our catalytic lead, our LEL sensors. Maybe we'll talk a glance about photoionization detectors. And then, of course, we'll explain some of the more of the warm-up of our electrochemical and our CADX speed, bump test, calibration, maintenance, other things like that. So before I get into the operations, I know you want me to get into that. You want me to start throwing some gas on top of it. We're going to see some different changes of our monitors. I still want to make sure we have a good baseline. These are the terms that our monitor alarms are coming off of. We have the permissible limit, permissible exposure limit, which comes from OSHA. So OSHA sets these levels and these limits, and that's going to be for 8 hours a day for 40 hours a week. That's typically going to be our first alarm of our monitors. So I want you to understand that one more time. 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. That's your first alarm of your monitor. When this thing starts going beep, 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 you have exceeded 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. So it's a very low level. It's an awareness that you're getting into a dangerous territory. But when this thing just first starts going beep, 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 it's not time to run, run, run. It's time to take a glance at what that number is, get out, and then we have to don our respiratory gear, whether that be an APR for industry or a powered air purifying respirator, or for us, for firefighters, we need an SCBA. We're bringing our air in with us. Now, the OSHA, back in the late 80s, they ended up getting sued by the chemical manufacturers of the world and of the nation. And they lost because they were not able to quantify what the hazard really was. So OSHA doesn't have a permissible exposure limit for every single chemical out there. That's where our friends NIOSH come on in. NIOSH, you've probably heard that term. They create our pocket guide, the NIOSH pocket guide, and they also, more importantly, they certify all of our respiratory protection for use in the United States. So you get the N95 face mask. That's going to have a NIOSH stamp on it. Your SCBA, your pack will have a NIOSH stamp of approval. So because they're giving you respiratory protection, they're going to recommend the environment that you can be in. NIOSH is 10 hours a day, 40 hours a week. So it's just like OSHA, a little bit different time standards, but that's once again a first alarm level that we take a look at with our monitors. For occupational stuff, when I'm a fire investigator now, for my fire investigators, when I give them an air monitor, we end up, there we go. Let's see if I can even show it to you. My other air monitor managers set up my air monitor here. Once again, my name is Chris Pfaff. They set up the label for it, and there we go. So they labeled it Pfaff sucks because apparently I'm a mean air monitor manager, and I challenge them so much. But that monitor is my monitor. It's going to give me a short-term exposure limit and a time-weighted average. When I turn this thing on, it's measuring my dose. It's assuming it's attached to me at all times. So it's going to monitor my dose. Think about this. Think about your car. Now, of course, I can't think about my car because I got an old 1960s Dodge, so there's nothing electronic on it. But when I think about a car, a newer car, on the dashboard, it has the computer that averages out your mileage. Hey, you're getting 8 miles to the gallon. Okay, it's not going to be that bad. You're getting 19 to 23 miles to the gallon, whatever you're driving on the highway. And of course, on a cross-country drive, you see that number get a little bit higher. You drive in the city, it gets lower, things like that. That's an average. The time-weighted average is the exact same thing. Inside, this is my dashboard. Now, if I end up taking this onto my fire engine, and I have that time-weighted average and that short-term exposure limit set up, firefighter A takes the monitor, they do the monitoring, they hand it to their lieutenant, the lieutenant does some monitoring, and then they hand it to another firefighter from a medic unit. This monitor is assuming it was attached to one person the whole time because it's measuring your dose, it's quantifying it. It may end up going into alarm. So for firefighters on the engine and the medic unit, we don't want that turned on. The short-term exposure limit, once again, is 15 minutes, no more than 4 times a day. And we probably all know what IDLH means, immediately dangerous to life and health, but we probably have never quantified it. That's the level it is where you're going to die. Yep. OSHA and NIOSH gave the same definition. That is the time, it's within 30 minutes that somebody's going to be into an environment, 30 minutes, where they will not be able to self-extricate. So IDLH is 30 minutes. Short-term exposure limit's 15 minutes. So when I tell my wife that I'll be ready shortly, it'll be 15 minutes. When she tells me she'll be ready for dinner, immediately I know to expect half an hour. So now really quickly into our true stuff. We have the way our monitors work. Inside here, I have my monitors and my sensors. We have a T90 time and a T50 time. Typically, they talk about T90. That's the time for the sensor to be correct, 90% correct. It takes time for this number to actually go up and down. So for some of them, it takes a little bit of time. And see here, oh yeah, that's a little added benefit for you. That is our Hazmat air monitor chart right there. On the back, we have the number readings, as you can see, and on the front, we have a QR code. You can purchase these cards to attach to your air monitor at Hazmat and Rescue. The purchase is pretty much to get you that QR code, so I'm giving it to you for free right now. So within that, it's not updated right now, but it's going to give you your T90 times, your cross sensitivities, and your correlation charts for all the main brands of air monitors that we have out there. So for my Draeger monitor, it's going to take me 17 seconds for it to measure 90% accurately. So it takes time for it to breathe the gas and then get rid of the gas. And you see the T50 time is a little bit shorter. Now let's take a look at what our correlation charts are for our LEL sensors. So I'm looking at my LEL sensor right now. It has that T90 time of 17 seconds, but this sensor inside here, you can see just the big cylinder right there. This was calibrated on methane. My MSA air monitor that I have in here that's turned on right now, this was calibrated on pentane. It is set up and it's dialed to be correct to that gas and that gas only, but it's a lower explosive limit monitor. So it can pick up the lower explosive limit of any flammable vapor or gas. So how does it do that? Well, it kind of burns the gas, if you will. We'll talk about that here in a second. But most importantly, as we go through this, because it's a different type of gas and it burns at a different level and a different value, we have to worry about a correlation or a cross sensitivity to it. So we see for this product here, oh, there we go. I went forward too far. There we go. We see here for butane compared to butane and carbon monoxide, they have a different correlation. So if we're running at 10%, or if we're running at 10% here, it's going to say 6% on the meter. So it gives us a little bit of a difference as we look at this. We have to make sure our gas is calibrated and correlated properly. And that gets a little bit more in depth. The safety factor, because for firefighters, we're not going to be doing that. The safety factor we have is that this is measuring 10% of the lower explosive limit. So 10% of whatever it takes to ignite. So let me put this into context here with propane, the most common gas that we end up seeing and responding to. Propane has a lower explosive limit of 2.1% in atmosphere. If I have less than 2.1% and I try to light a match, nothing ignites. If I'm at 2.1% or higher, up to 9.5, we finally get fire and we're able to make some barbecue some hamburgers and hot dogs. Perfect. This thing will go beep, beep, beep at 10% of 2.1%. Now, I don't want to get super mathy into everybody, but we're going to talk about parts per million versus percentage. So a part per million is a distance of measurement of concentration. A percent is a distance of measurement and concentration as well. It's kind of like an inch versus a mile, right? That's the way we try to think about this. Like, how far are you from me to you right now on the computer screen? I'm guessing no more than 3 feet, right? 3 feet. Okay, that's a perfect way to measure it. How far am I from you right now in reality? Let's just say I'm in Seattle, Washington. How many feet away are we apart? You're not going to measure it that way, right? You're going to measure in distance, 600 miles, 2,300 miles, 1,500 miles, maybe 3,000 miles. We're not measuring in feet because it's such a long distance. 2.1% concentration is a large distance. This bad boy right here, measuring small distances. So we're measuring a part per million or a percentage. So if I sit there and take a look at this, I have to convert that. 5,280 feet equal a mile. Hey, guess what? 10,000 parts per million equals 1%. Do the algebra, do the math, it's all perfect. 1 million parts per million is 100% of the atmosphere. 500,000 parts per million is 50%. 250,000 parts per million is 25%. 1% equals 10,000 parts per million. So 2.1% is 21,000 parts per million. This goes off at 10% of that. So this will go into alarm at 2,100 parts per million. The biggest thing I want you guys to understand, I know, you are mathing out right now. You're kind of falling asleep. The biggest thing I want you to understand with my LEL sensor, it has a 10-to-1 protection factor. It goes beep, beep, beep at 1/10 of that flammable range. Even if it's above the range, you're still technically safe as we go through that. So that's a benefit that we have with our LEL sensor. And this is, I want to make sure I show you exactly how this works as well. What I have in here, it's a light bulb. It's an incandescent light bulb, not a fluorescent, not a halogen, anything special like that. The best way you think about this is an incandescent light bulb. So I've got my little light bulb. We got the Wheatstone bridge and catalytic bead. They could talk about more technical things. When I turn the monitor on, it turns on the electrical elements. You see the electrical element with the little tiny wires right there. We have one that's uncoated and one that's coated. As the flammable gas passes over the uncoated element, that changes the electrical resistance, which changes the reading. Now, of course, because of that, we have the potential for fire. I kind of don't want to go into a fire environment with something that can catch it on fire. So what we have inside here is a spark arrestor. So I have a little metal screen inside of this, and I think I had a slide on it a second ago. We have a little metal screen that keeps the spark, if a fire happens in there, from coming out, which is good. We didn't blow up. We saved the day. Also, it's bad. Think about, well, I know we got some diesel drivers out there. I talked to you about my 60s Dodge. I got an old 65 Dodge Polara, but I also have a 1993 Dodge diesel 3/4 ton. Oh yeah, first gen all the way. And for anybody that doesn't know diesels, the term rolling coal, what that means is you end up stomping that gas in a high gear and you are going to pump out black soot. Long chain hydrocarbons like diesel can do that. I have never rolled coal, by the way. I want to make sure that's a proper disclaimer. So when I sit there and talk about products that are long chain hydrocarbons, they make soot. So gas, pentane, propane, and methane, those are light fuels. Gasoline, diesel, things like that, they're heavy, thick, long chain hydrocarbons. They make soot and they get clogged in that spark arrestor. So we can smoke out our air monitor. And that's a bad thing. So we don't want to go into a high percentage like that. So that's how our LEL sensor works. It takes a little bit of time, but it does work for us, right? Now let's go back to our electrochemical sensors. If I can ever get my machine to work. Oh, there we go. Now we got the GIF working. You get to see all the cool stuff passing by there. We might come back there, but what we're seeing is the readings that are going right there. My electrochemical sensors, they work in a different function. My electrochemical sensors, when they function, what we have is pretty much a little cup of Gatorade. We have an electrolyte in there. And that electrolyte reacts with a chemical, with the vapor that's in the air. And it'll change the electrical reading as we go through this. And we see that we have the gas right here. This is carbon monoxide coming in to an electrolyte, pretty much like Gatorade, and then it changes the electrical content of what's going on, and we will get a subsequent reading. Unfortunately, my sensor can pick up other gases, and that gives us an interference. For example, my carbon monoxide sensor, it ends up reading hydrogen unbelievably well. If I put just a little bit of hydrogen into the atmosphere, my carbon monoxide sensor is going to start screaming and start going off. That actually ended up causing a hazmat call probably about 7 years ago because we didn't know about that. So as I'm going through this right now, this is my 5-gas monitor. This is the one that said Pfaff sucks. This one's into alarm 2 right now because My hydrogen cyanide sensor is old. It needs to get calibrated. We've tried to calibrate it. It needs to get replaced. I thought this was a good training element for you to understand. I'm not in a toxic environment. As you can see, I have not died and I have not slowed down my speech either. But as we can see here, there we go. I want to make sure that's quiet for you. My hydrogen cyanide keeps on jumping up and down all around. That gives me a clue that it's something's wrong with it. The Gatorade is evaporated. My little sensor in here ain't happy anymore, and it's giving a funky electronic reading to the motherboard of this. Once again, think about this like a smartphone or a computer. That's all it is. It's just a device that's reading an electrical current, high, low, or bad. And you probably saw that I had some negative readings. My -2 reading of H2S, hydrogen sulfide. I'm not in a negative hydrogen sulfide environment, but the electrical readings for this tell me that I'm in a negative hydrogen sulfide environment. So once again, just like EMS, if you put somebody onto an EMS monitor and they're looking perfectly fine and it says they have a blood pressure of 240 over 190, are you going to believe the machine or are you going to believe the person? Read the person, read the environment. The monitor may be correct because most of these gases we can't smell. But when I sat there and I took a look at that sensor that's jumping up and jumping down like that, I was like, this is questionable. I don't trust that. I'm going to look further for some other type of information. So you see some of those correlation factors that we have, the cross sensitivities of our products right there. Now, some of the big things that we need to worry about. Where is my gas in my environment? I take my MSA or my industrial scientific Ventus monitor here, and I'm trying to measure for a gas. Where am I going to measure? When I've worked with FDNY, I think some of those guys on their hazmat team first, they're some of the smartest guys out there. Don't ask them. They'll be sure to tell you. They absolutely will. But when they talk about this with air monitors, we're measuring a softball size environment, which is a perfect way to think about it. I love it. So right now I'm measuring a softball size environment right here. However, my gas might be down there. So I got to go down there. Or my gas might be up there. So we have to understand what the term R gas D or vapor density or molecular weight means. Our buddy Craig Dyer here, he gives a perfect explanation with, oh gosh, more math. I swear to God, guys, it's not a math class, it's a fire class. But we take a look at what our atmosphere is made up of, and we see the weight of oxygen, the weight of nitrogen. That's the molecular weight, the molar mass of those two main components of what we're breathing. And you average out those numbers and do some algebra and other crazy scientific things, and we have a molecular weight of 28.8. So any molecules, any compounds that have a molecular weight more than 28 goes down. Anything less goes up. Okay, that helps me out. That lets me understand where this stuff is. Way back in the day, over 100 years ago, a New York firefighter came up with the term ha-ha-mycin. And that was an acronym for all the lighter than air gases. There they are listed, and that's their molecular weight, or their vapor density, or their relative gas density compared to air. Air is a 1. Air is a 1, right? Since then, we've come up with new terms. Probably about 20 years ago, the term 4H Medicana came on up. Great terms, awesome. When somebody goes on diborane or a neon emergency, give me a heads up. I'm not going to say it's not going to happen, but especially for firefighting, we're not going to see all these chemicals. And then you look at some of these other chemicals. I bolded in the chemicals that are actually lighter than air. What does our air consist of? It's a nitrogen oxygen environment, but nitrogen's lighter than air. Nitrogen is air. Carbon monoxide. Carbon monoxide has a vapor density of 0.98. Think about it this way. I got a 100-pound fifth grader sitting on the seesaw right here. And then I put the 98-pound fifth grader on this side of the seesaw. Are they gonna be able to play seesaw? Absolutely. Think about where we may see a carbon monoxide detector. Up high? Yeah, why not? Down low? Yeah, why not? Right here in the middle because there's a plug? Yeah, why not? Because carbon monoxide mixes up with the entire environment. So carbon monoxide is not a great clue. But you take the 100-pound fifth grader once again, and then you put the 7-pound hydrogen. Are they going to be able to ever play seesaw? It ain't going to work. So when we break this down, here's some of the more important gases that we need to worry about as firefighters. Methane for natural gas leaks. Guess what? The I in illuminating gases, that's methane. It's dirty methane. So it's already there. So methane. Hydrogen fluoride. This stuff comes off of our car fires and our EV fires. Lithium ion fires pump out tons of this stuff. It has an ideal H value of 30 parts per million. So we got to monitor for that. These monitors don't check for that. So biggest thing is wear your respiratory gear on all car fires and all EV fires that we go on, or electrical fires, right? Hydrogen cyanide, part of the toxic twins. Once again, we see that's a little bit lighter than air. Acetylene, that's a flammable gas. Hydrogen, absolutely. We have to watch out for that. And then ammonia. Ammonia emergencies are very serious, and they turn into a hazmat tech call very quickly because it's a corrosive gas. It's going to burn my skin very quickly. And then carbon monoxide is a common gas that we worry about firefighters, but once again, we saw where the weight is. So for all those gases, I'm measuring high. We want to measure high for that. We need to know where we're measuring. Wait a second. Research reports that I've learned about, they invent over 30 chemicals a day. It's fact. You can check it out. I'm not going to cite my resources. It may not be a fact. No, it's a fact. It's a fact because there's different constitutes of all these different chemicals that they make out there. So between all these chemicals and everything else out there, where do you think the product's going to be? Down, 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 down. That's a big thing we need to sit there and think about. One of my partners here gave me that acronym. He likes to think about little things. So if you want to take a snapshot of that, feel free. I'm not going to lean heavily on my firefighters can analyze hazardous atmospheres, but it is a great reminder of the main gases that we worry about that go up. The rest of our gases go down. That's what I want to remind you guys about. So gases go down. Let's sit there and think about this again, though. This is a gas monitor. It's monitoring gases. It's not monitoring liquids, right? It's not monitoring vapors. It can, but it's not designed to do that. There's a lot of things that we can do with a fire engine or a ladder truck. There's some things that we do that it's not designed to. Anybody ever see a pizza truck, fire engine that's converted into a pizza truck? I have. Some of those places make good pizza, but that's not what the fire truck was designed to do. So it doesn't do it amazingly, unbelievably efficiently, right? So we can measure the vapors coming from our flammable liquids, but it's not designed to do that. Therefore, it's slower to react, and there's other issues. Quick note on that, all liquids, except for water, all liquids are heavy. The vapors that come from the liquids are heavier than air. So that's another clue to monitor low as we go through everything, right? So the picture that we see there on the left, that is a Draeger very similar to this, and it's a little bit more exotic Draeger. It's measuring things like carbon dioxide and ammonia. But you can see it's going into alarm rather quickly because it's measuring carbon dioxide, which is a gas. My monitor on the right, it looks like it has a very high reading. That's another exotic monitor, a photoionization detector, similar to the one that I have here on my MSA. It's measuring for volatile organic compounds. And the pool that we see in front of it is gasoline. So it can, but it takes time to measure that, and it's not as clear as a tool. Notice right here the difference that I have when I took these pictures of about, what is it, like 2.5 inches from the pool of gasoline. It went from about 20 parts per million up to 230 parts per million, just with that little distance that I had as I went through this. So it doesn't monitor the vapors coming from liquids amazingly effectively. There's other tools that we're going to have to do with that. And then if you see a liquid on the ground, it's always producing a vapor. It's always producing a vapor. If you say it 3 times, that means it's on a test. It's always producing a vapor. Okay, I'm kidding, guys. There's no test at the end of this. Now, with this, on all the liquids always producing a vapor, let's take a look at some physical properties here. We're talking about vapor pressure. Typically, when I'm talking about vapor pressure and boiling point, I spend an hour. But we've been going for about 45 minutes, almost an hour as it is. So I'm going to give you a very, very pared down version. These are the terms that we look at, and these come from the NIOSH guide and General Sciences Total. We talk about our pressure and our temperature. They're joined at the hip. You increase the temperature, you increase the pressure. You decrease temperature, likewise, you decrease the pressure. Think about it with your SCBA bottles. Hot filling, we increase the pressure, therefore we increase the temperature. After we go through a confidence course or working on fire, our SCBA cylinders are cold because we lowered the pressure, lowered the temperature. When I look at this, this is my term right here in my chart. We're using this as measuring tools right now. 8 millimeters of mercury. Why are we using millimeters of mercury? We're here in America, back-to-back World War champs. Well, because the NIOSH Pocket Guide says so. This is the guideline that we're using. It's our rule of thumb. So water has a vapor pressure of 17 millimeters of mercury, and we know that water boils at 212 degrees Fahrenheit at sea level. So we look at some of our flammable liquids. Diesel fuel and gasoline, my two most common flammable liquids. Notice the vapor pressures, 0.4 millimeters of mercury for diesel, and then up to 300 millimeters of mercury for gasoline. If I pour diesel on the ground, does it evaporate very quickly? No, we know that. If I pour gasoline on the ground, you can smell it rather rapidly because gasoline evaporates because it has a higher vapor pressure. So that gives us a clue. We're able to monitor the gasoline vapors easier than the diesel vapors. Now, what about my gases? Propane and butane are two common gases. These are measured in atmospheres. God dang it, more math. So I have to take 14.7 psi, multiply it, 14.7 times 2.05, about 30 psi. That's the vapor pressure of butane. And we can see we can make butane a liquid in our normal environment if we get it down below 31 degrees Fahrenheit. Propane, on the other hand, it takes much more pressure. We're about 125 degrees at 68 degrees Fahrenheit. The boiling point's down to negative 44 degrees Fahrenheit. My LEO sensor is going to read these way more appropriately because that's what that tool is meant for. For anybody that just wants to end up putting this tool together, the last chart that I have on there, just to remind things, if you look at a NIOSH Pocket Guide or a safety data sheet and you find out what the vapor pressure of a liquid is, now you have a rule of thumb. Water is 17, gasoline's about 300, acetone, nail polish is about 180. So the more vapors it produces, the more readily you can detect the vapors coming off of it with this, right? Just knowing the limitations of it. All right, wrapping up really quick, we're talking about the activation of our monitors. Oh, there we go. It's time to pull out our CalGas. Yes, our monitors need to be calibrated on frequent cycles. They need to be bump tested prior to every use according to manufacturer's recommendations. Us as firefighters, we most likely will not be doing that much. But a bump test verifies that it actually is working with its system and what's going on. Oh, I grabbed the hydrogen cyanide cylinder. That's not going to work very well. That was my hydrogen cyanide cylinder that was going bad on it. So I'm going to take my older cylinder right here, my older CalGas, and let's see here. You want to make sure it's old. It's a little bit newer than this. This one expired in 2005, but I should still be able to get something from this. My monitors have a low and a high alarm. We talk about rising versus lowering. The only one that's typically going to be lowering is my oxygen sensor because my oxygen is reading either 20.8 for some brands or 20.9 for other brands. And that's just up to the manufacturer and what they want to do. So if I lower it below, and you can see the numbers right there, when I go below my alarm, it'll be a lowering alarm. If it goes above, it'll be a raising alarm. And of course, a non-latching alarm, if you heard it for a second, let's see if I can get it going. Let's see if I can get things going here. Yeah, I got to actually look at the monitor now instead of looking at you. I'm sorry. I'm getting a little bit of a reading. A little bit more. I should just turn on the busted monitor just to get a latching and non-latching alarm. Once again, 15-year-old CalGas kind of wears out. Yeah, she ain't gonna work right now. We're up to 6 parts per million of CO. We got a long way to go. There we go. We're getting a little bit. So as we're going through this, let's see if we can get this going. If I get into my first alarm above the PEL or above the REL, we have to back out and go get respiratory protection. We're above that alarm. When we leave that environment, this monitor should stop chirping. That's what it means. That's a non-latching alarm. If we go above the second alarm, which we have our second alarm readings right here on this air monitor chart, it will stay latched. And when it goes high, it will stay high and will continue until I actually acknowledge it. So let me try it here with my Drager right now. And you see the different brands that we have right there. Black Line's a pretty good brand new manufacturer. We have our MSAs. I showed you one right there. The monitor on the top left of the MSA is a cell phone enabled, so it'll actually identify your location. And then the Drager on the right, we're using it for a technical rescue call there as well. So we have our latching and our non-latching alarms. I'm gonna continue on to the next slide, and once this thing starts screaming, we'll talk about what that means. So here's what our alarm levels are. That first alarm's that non-latching. We have some of our exotic and our toxic gases there: ammonia, chlorine, sulfur dioxide, hydrogen fluoride, ethylene oxide. I grabbed all those from table 3 of our emergency response guidebook because that's the 6 most commonly shipped toxic inhalation hazards right there. Notice that all of these, they're very well below the ideal H. I'm not going to say that you're perfectly fine where you're at, but you just need to recognize that we have some safe working area. You heard when it went from the first alarm to the second alarm? I'm at 14.3%, so there's no way I'm going to be able to get back down to it. Let's see here. Let me walk back up here. Down to 10. The second alarm for this is at 10 parts per million. So it should shut up right now. I have to acknowledge my monitor, and then it just quiets down. So now it's still in alarm 1. It says it's still in alarm 1. As it continues to reset, as it continues to go on down, we'll see if we can get this below the 4.7 first alarm reading that I have for this alarm. But that sensor is just cranky, isn't she? As it keeps on going down. We'll carry on, and I'll see if I can get this number down below the 4.7. We can go through there. But this gives you a good clue of what we're looking at. There we are. So we're at the negative reading right now. There we are. And it's going to go up. Single alarm, first alarm. If it were to drop down from this, it'll stop chirping. So that's what my first, my single stage, my non-latching, my latching alarms mean. So in total, this tool right here, it's only as good as what you know about it, really. These things take up juice. You have to keep them charged at all times. Those electrochemical sensors, they have the electrolyte, they have the Gatorade in there. If I put 2 wires into Gatorade, it's always consuming electricity, even if the device is off. So we have to keep our monitors properly charged. We have to keep them calibrated and bump test and properly maintained, which I'm not doing, hence the name of my air monitor right now. We want to make sure we do that on the manufacturer's recommendations. For companies like MSA and others, they say 30 days for calibration, bump prior to every use. For monitors like my Drager and other monitors, they say up to 180 days, so 6 months prior to calibration, but still we have to bump prior to use. Once again, we want to make sure our calibration gas is within its expiration date and that we have the proper concentrations of everything. There's a whole gambit of things. I'm not going to recommend any monitor over the other. There's expensive monitors, there's cheap monitors. Oh, the last part, there's expensive monitors and there's cheap monitors. Like this bad boy that I bought off of Amazon. I knew I pulled this thing out of my box for a while. When my wife saw me pull this out, she said it looked like it came from a teenager's makeup container. This came from Amazon for, I think it was $95. And as we can see, it is a high-tech air or gas detector. It comes with a very extensive 8-page design, and you can see it has my 4 gases, and of course it says gas detector. The good thing is, not only does it have it has the vibration, it has the light, it has all 4 of our normal gases, and it does, I think if you can see it right there, it even says, I know that's kind of dark, it even shows my ranges in which my monitors go. If anybody ever watched the TV series on HBO, Chernobyl, they said 3.6 ranking, not too good, not too bad. Well, why was it 3.6? Because that was the maximum that they could read. The maximum that our monitors can read is an important thing for us because they were reading far more than 3.6. Their devices just couldn't do it. Just like a car from the 1980s. How fast were you going? 55 miles per hour. Are you sure? Yeah, that's all the speedometer said, when you could be going much, much faster. So of course we see our device right here. No, I would not recommend a tool such as this gas detector But it is an entertaining little device. Let's see if I can actually make, I want to make this one go off so bad. I can actually breathe on this one. I never recommend anybody breathing into an air monitor, but when I paid 75 or 80 or $90 or whatever it was for this thing, I have no problem with it. I might be able to get the L2 sensor to go below. I was actually into alarm the other day. I am getting it down to 19.4. Don't do what I do. Yeah, I wouldn't trust this monitor in any way, shape, or form. So make sure you buy from a reputable manufacturer. Draeger, MSA, Blackline, Raise Systems, Sensit, BW is another good one, that and Industrial Scientific. But that's pretty much all I got, guys. There's all my information right there. Feel free to reach me. I'm gonna after I get done with this, I'm gonna pass this information on to Sam and Chief Mann to make sure that they can pass this on. But I thank you guys for this opportunity, and of course, make sure to log your training and get out there and train.
Okay, Chris, thanks very much. And we're going to get on through some questions before we go into the Q&A, and most of them popped up in chat as well. Let's take the first question here. This is from Dave Costa. What type of training drills do you conduct to give firefighters realistic training with air monitors?
It's a great question, Dave. And when we take a look at this, I got to make sure I don't think in that hazmat tech mindset. We've come together with drills where we've pulled out calibration gas or carbon dioxide to lower the environment and the pressures. When I end up doing things like that, I take the calibration gas, sometimes pass it on over as we go through our device. Another company from Hazmat Nation, they provide a product called HazSim, which can actually take us in where we're carrying a simulated air monitor and we're walking on in, and we will have a change of readings. But it's as simple as, even if you don't have a great tool like HazSim with our friends over there with Hazmat Nation, if you're going into an environment of a carbon monoxide call, a natural gas call, and I'm talking about a training event right now, and you're going in, you can have a proctor or a training advisor that's supporting the drill saying, hey, your carbon monoxide levels have jumped up to 75 parts per million, and you now have 1% of your LEL. What are you going to do? And then, of course, we adjust and react to it. We're going to back on out. We're going to pull a hose line. We may end up calling a hazmat team. So we can definitely simulate it without even actually doing things like this, but just turning the monitors on and operating them are the critical thing. I passed out a brand new air monitor to one of my other air monitor managers this morning, and I said, hey, here's the book, here's the monitor, learn it, because we're going to do a video recording in the next week on it.
So something I've learned about monitors over the years, and I'm not picking on salesmen. So if there's any fire equipment salespeople on here, I'm not picking on you. But I've noticed that you can have a sales rep, very reputable sales rep, that'll sell you a monitor. And then you ask that sales rep to do a class on the monitor he sold you, and they are completely lost. So I guess I'm asking you, and maybe I'm making a statement as well. When you buy a monitor, you may want to get either somebody that knows the monitor, or somebody, if it's an MSA, somebody from MSA to actually do the training on the monitor. Is that
absolutely
a good suggestion?
Yeah, you're hitting the nail on the head. I work with vendors, and then I work with the vendors of the salesmen, and then I work with the industry reps. They're two different layers. So the manufacturer of a Raise system or MSA, they are going to know more about the system typically. Not always, but typically. I had one of the pictures from my presentation came from MSA and their presentation to me just last week. And that wasn't the salesman. Those guys aren't selling me the monitors. That's from MSA specifically. And one of the things that was very interesting from MSA themselves, and I'm not knocking MSA, they're awesome guys and these are some awesome tools, but this is a reality of it. They said there's a lot of times that people buy this stuff from us and they expect us to train them. Well, yeah, who's going to? So once again, yeah, from all salesmen and vendors, some are more passionate and more knowledgeable, and I know a few of them. If you guys wanted to get offline with me, if you guys wanted to toss me an email, I can send you their way as well. But there's a lot of them that don't know stuff. One of my vendors right now for my systems, I have to give them specific part numbers for exactly what I want. I can't just say, hey, this is what I want, because they don't understand the technology. So yeah, there's the up and the down, and it is coming down to reach out to trainers to make sure that we're aware of what's going on.
Okay, so we've been asked this question a couple of times, so I'll address it to everybody. They want to know whether or not the PowerPoint will be available. When Sam sends out the notice to everybody, thank you for attending, there'll be links for the PowerPoint. There'll be links where you can send additional questions if you want to. So all that information will be provided to you. Chris's email address will be in the link. So if you wanted to email him directly, if you have any troubles getting to Chris, you can email me and I can get the information to him. So another question, let's see if I miss anything here. We're okay there. I don't see anything else. They were asking about the slides. Somebody was 2,834 miles from you when you asked a question earlier.
Good measurement. I love it. I love it.
So Ron has posted here, CO monitor went off in camper one night about 3 p.m., scared wife to death. So I got to share this story with you. So I live in Lewistown, Pennsylvania. During my tenure as a state fire commissioner, I was working at the State Fire Academy one winter afternoon, and my wife calls me and says, hey, the carbon monoxide detectors are going off in the house. Should I call the fire department? And I said, yes, you should call the fire department after you leave the house. Call from the driveway. She said, are you serious? Yes, I'm serious. So, of course, they dispatched the call. I left the fire academy to come to the call at my house because it's in my first due area. The dispatcher asked me when I responded to the call, are you okay on directions? And basically what had happened was I had a gas stove in the basement, a gas fireplace, and there's an adjustment for the air mixture on it, and it had gone bad, and it was burning so rich that everything in the basement was covered with soot. And that's why the alarms were going off. And I forget how many parts per million there was when the fire department first got here. So along those lines, something I've noticed with carbon monoxide monitors in particular, on carbon monoxide calls, I notice a lot of times firefighters enter the front door and they walk through the house rapidly. Okay, it's like, okay, I'm on division 1, and 2 minutes later I'm on division 2, and 3 minutes later I'm in the basement, and they're saying I don't have anything, but the carbon monoxide detectors in the house are still going off. Does that go back to your point about, I mean, it takes a little bit of time for that detector to monitor or pick up what's in the atmosphere?
It definitely does, Chief. And that's what that T90 time comes down to. And we don't need to memorize what a T90 time is. The biggest thing we do need to remember, and you said it perfect, is that this thing takes time to respond to what it's doing. When I'm teaching my ops classes and I'm going up, I could actually move this over to where my door is, but I end up going up. It's like, this is why people hate hazmat techs, because we walk on up before we even open the door. We sit there for 15 seconds, and I literally sit there for 15 seconds through the high, medium, and then the low. And then I open the door and I stick the monitor and I keep the door closed, just with the monitor in there. And I do the same thing. And it takes me 2 minutes just to go through that spill. But yes, we are impatient as firefighters, as this generation, as everybody else, and we expect this thing to work perfectly immediately. So yes, unfortunately, we do have a lack of training on that. Our passive detectors usually are a little bit slower than our active detectors with a pump. But yeah, unfortunately, I'm not blaming those firefighters in any way, shape, or form. I never do on any of my training videos. It just comes down to a lack of training. It takes time. Give this thing about 5 to 10 seconds. That's usually good for some of them. On things like hydrogen cyanide and more exotic gases, it can be up to 3 minutes.
Okay. So it's slow down. All right. So another thing I want to throw out, something I've heard of in the past and something's always concerned me, gas leaks. So I go in, and the gas monitor. So initially it's too rich to burn. All right, nothing's going to happen. There's just too much there. So I open the windows, and now everybody starts to relax because I've opened the windows, but I could bring that gas down from the higher explosive limit to the LEL, and it could hit that sweet spot, and I'm no longer paying attention to the monitor because I've opened all the windows and started the vent to place. Is that an issue as well?
You're absolutely getting into one of my favorite stories I love to teach in my ops classes. It's about me barbecuing out in Eastern Washington with good old Franken truck. I'll leave the finer details out of there, but the end of the story is I burn off my eyebrows because I found too rich and too lean of an environment. In a very serious sense, unfortunately, down in Canby, Oregon, some firefighters ended up doing almost the same thing. They were in the perfect mixture of an environment. They were using the wrong monitors that they grabbed from the gas company. I very, very strongly urge for any responders to never grab equipment that you're not trained on. Don't grab the natural gas company's equipment and go use it. There, they unfortunately did. They saw 6% on the meter, and they ended up opening up the door to ventilate, like you talked about, when they hit the garage door opener. That caused the source of ignition. They were measuring it in percentage of volume. Natural gas has a flammable range of 5 to 15. The number 6 is in the middle of that. They ended up creating an ignition source. They blew it up. 4 firefighters were inside. It blew the garage door 60 feet across the street. Unfortunately, luckily nobody died, but it did harm them very, very significantly. So we have to keep our guard up. And I have a newsletter video on gas emergencies just like that. If you guys go to my webpage, it's a very, very serious issue. Whether it be natural gas, gasoline, propane, any type of flammable vapor that can build up. We get between that too rich or that too rich of an environment, we are down into that very dangerous zone. You're 100% correct.
So Chris, I don't see any more questions. Let's see, there's a comment in here. I always run 2 monitors on an incident. One incident, both came up different readings. You should have been seeing the confusion when I requested a company for a 3rd monitor. Have to find which one was correct. Both were recently calibrated. Turns out one had sensors failing and there wasn't an issue.
Right here. This bad boy that was screaming to us with my high and low alarms, I calibrated this 3 weeks ago. I turned it on for a fire investigation, no, for an odor investigation last week, and was doing all the funky stuff that you just saw on here. It's a recently calibrated monitor. Once again, yes, 100%. Bring another monitor in if you need. Bring a 3rd. Absolutely, absolutely.
All right. So I don't see any other questions or comments. So Chris, I want to thank you for an extremely informative presentation. I'm hopeful our listeners will take advantage of the information you shared this evening. To our audience, please visit www.hazmatandrescue.com, and that link will be provided in the email that Sam sends you all tomorrow. If you have any questions or need additional resources from today, or you have an idea for a future webinar, please email me or email us at info@Provident INS. We'll get back to you as soon as we can. I want to remind our audience, and Sam reminded me again today to make sure I drove this point home. Please take a couple of minutes and do the little 5-question survey at the end of this so we can do better with these going forward. And it'll make Sam happy, especially if everybody that's left here now at least takes the time to do the survey. You can look for an email in the next couple of days. It'll have your certificates attached to it. And if there's any issues, you can get back to me. This wraps up our first webinar for 2023. All right. And hey, one other thing I want to point out for those of you that asked a question, Chris and I did a podcast with one another probably about a month or so ago. And Sam can probably include that in the email tomorrow. If you wanted to listen to the podcast that Chris and I did that had some other valuable information on hazmat and rescue, that'd be great as well. So, if you're subscribed to our podcast channel, Station 1902, please keep an eye out in your email for a new episode with Dr. Mark Cruz from a First Responder Behavioral Health, which will air in early February, followed by a webinar from him on March the 2nd. Until we meet again, stay safe and stay healthy. Thank you all.